The further discussion
Move to strike the last word.
on the amendment? The gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 5 minutes to strike the last word.
Thank you, and I yield my time to Mr. Steil.
Thank you to my colleague from Ohio. I'll note two things to my friend across the aisle. One, the woman who I met in South Milwaukee was a person of color. I didn't add it to the start of the story because I didn't think it was as relevant as the fact that she, like all Americans, are suffering from higher prices. I would also note to my friend across the aisle that prior to the pandemic, under the policies of the Trump administration, we saw real wages increasing across the board. We saw real wages increasing, I believe it's 6.8% the year before the pandemic, and it was higher than average for Hispanics, for blacks, for women, for veterans. Under this administration, real wages are falling. Real median weekly wages are falling at 3.9%. And it's worse for African Americans. African Americans are falling at 4.6%. So under the policies prior to the pandemic, under the Trump administration, real wages were increasing. The standard of living was increasing for all Americans, and in particular, the least amongst us, those who are in the most challenged communities, in particular, Hispanics and blacks, as my colleague would like to be notified of. And following the pandemic, under one-party Democratic control, as prices are rising faster than wages, where everyone in America is falling behind at a rate of 3.9%, I would note one-party Democratic control has uniquely hurt black Americans. And so if we want to have the discussion on the merits of who's getting clobbered by the policies of this administration, by the policies of one-party Democratic control, happy to have that conversation. Because prior to the pandemic, under Republican policies, people were moving up. And people were moving up the most who were least amongst us. Rightfully so, because they had the farthest to go up. There's plenty of people who are challenged in southeast Wisconsin, in Racine, Wisconsin, or Kenosha, or Janesville, that's my hometown. You better believe it. And we had policies that actually address it to help the least amongst us. And on the other side of this, under one-party Democratic control, we have policies that's clobbering everybody. But you know who's really hurting? It's really hurting low-income workers. And in my district in southeast Wisconsin, it's disproportionately impacting people of color. You better believe it's darn frustrating to see that happen after we saw policies that were helping everyone, including the least amongst us. And so for anybody to walk away believing this side of the aisle isn't fighting for the least amongst us is an absolutely disingenuous argument, Mr. Chair, because this side of the aisle is putting forward policies that don't just in theory help the least amongst us, they help the least amongst us in practice. The data shows it. Prior to the pandemic, real wages increasing at nearly historic rates and across the board, and uniquely, and most importantly, it was helping people who fall in some of the most challenged demographic groups in this country. Above the median real wage increase, I will remind you, prior to the pandemic, under the Trump administration, were blacks, Hispanics, whites, Asians, veterans, rightfully so, because they had the farthest to come up. We recognize that there's real challenges in this community. We realize there's real challenges in the United States of America. And how do we do it? We grow the economy, we provide opportunity for people, and under one-party Democratic control, as people are getting punched in the face by higher prices, as real wages are coming down, people are falling further behind, you better believe that there's people of color that are even getting hurt harder than average. Well, I suggest we change policies, and we go back to the policies of the Trump administration when people were improving their standard of living, and those who are the least amongst us, who find themselves in the most challenged communities in Wisconsin and across the country, that we return to policies that were empirically successful at moving people up. And anybody viewing this, that people are trying to hurt the least amongst us, that is a garbage argument that I will be more than happy to debate anytime, anywhere. I yield back to my colleague from Ohio.
Yield back.
Is there further discussion?
Madam Chair.
If not, I'd like to...
no.
Is there, Mr. Perlmutter, you're
Thank you.
recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Just a couple things, and I'm going to yield to Mr. Green. I just remind my friend from Wisconsin, there are 9 million more jobs today than there were under Donald Trump when he left office. And we know, let's talk about lumber, which you were complaining about a year ago this time about inflation, and it was way up. It's crashed. Okay? Oil is down $30 a barrel in the last 2 weeks. This is peaking. We'll get it under control. And, you know, we've had exports are up. So I think all of us would agree we don't want to see inflation, but we went through a pandemic and we've had shortages. So you could go get a Peloton today at half the price you would have paid a year ago, Mr. Steil. And I will.
You can't eat a Peloton. That's not relevant.
The floor belongs to the gentleman from Colorado.
I would say to the gentleman from North Carolina and to my friend from Wisconsin, at the beginning of the pandemic, you couldn't get toilet paper. You couldn't get hand sanitizer. You can go get it for nothing today. That's the nature of a pandemic and the effect that it had across supply chains and supply of all kinds. Now, the real question here is Mr. Green is trying to address the fees and the different kinds of penalties imposed upon people, and he's got a bill that takes care of that today. And what is being asked of under Mr. McHenry's amendment is that be delayed. There's no reason to delay that. So I'm going to yield to my friend from Texas, Mr. Green.
Thank the gentleman.